Happy New Year! I did that lame joke on Wednesday, as did everybody else who covers the NFL. It's the new league year officially, and all the free agency moves that have taken place to this point are actually official. Michael Fabiano and Lindsay Rhodes here with you on the Believe Fantasy Football Show to break down the fantasy consequences of everything that we've seen so far. We talked a lot about some of the early moves. It's kind of quieted down since Tuesday's show, Fabs.
Yep. Yeah, it has. We had a couple of big names, those signed, which we'll talk about, including the King, Derrick Henry. And then
I thought you were gonna go straight to Eric Kendricks because that.
Oh, no. This was next.
Okay.
And then we could go and crap on the Cowboys. I don't think Eric Kendricks can play running back, but whatever, it is what it is. Or offensive line. We can get into that. This is Jerry Jones's idea of all in. We're in a lot of trouble, man. Oh my God. Anyways, yeah. So we've had some good sightings, some that are not so good. I did a list for Sports Illustrated, and most of the signings, Lindsay, I would say were fantasy friendly. There are some that weren't. We're going to talk about those, but I think for the most part, fantasy managers benefited from a lot of the free agent moves and the trade, that happened, of course, with Joe Mixon to Houston. And I found maybe half a dozen that I really didn't love, but for the most part, everybody else I think is either a push or like a positive from a fantasy perspective.
All right. Well, let's get into some of those moves in just a second. First, I want to remind you that BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year with up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends. You can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team. And remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BetOnline. The game starts here. Where should we start, Fabs? How about with the Ridley move? Because there wasn't a lot of big wide receiver movement on the first couple of days of free agency. We didn't really talk about the wide receivers on Tuesday's show. Now we have something to talk about. Calvin Ridley spurning the Jaguars. We all kind of thought he was waiting until that 4 p.m. Eastern deadline on Wednesday so that he could re-sign with the Jaguars in order to save them a draft round, I guess, in terms of the capital that would go back to the Falcons. That ended up not being the case. He got the bag from the Titans, 4 years, $92 million, $50 million guaranteed. And so he enters the Titans wide receiver room. What do you make of this? Let's break down the Titans aspect of it first.
I was going to say,
Calvin Ridley and Tennessee.
There's definitely two sides to this breakdown. And Tennessee, so you add Tony Pollard. The Titans have spent a ton of money because they had a ton of money under the cap. They've added to the offensive line. And of course, they bring in Calvin Ridley. From a fantasy perspective, I don't love the move. I really don't. I don't love Pollard because I think he's going to split time with Tajay Spears, maybe a 60-40. We talked about that earlier in the week. And honestly, with Calvin Ridley, like, I'm not going to poo-poo the whole thing. Okay, because think about it. When you talk about Brian Callahan's offense, 2 years ago in Cincinnati, he supported two very good wide receivers, right? Jamar was elite, and T. Higgins was very good. But they had Joe Burrow. This offense and the fantasy value of the players within this offense all depends on the development of Will Levis. All of it. If Will Levis comes out and stinks, well, then Calvin Ridley's not going to be any better than he was last year, and he wasn't the top 15 wide receiver last year. DeAndre Hopkins is not going to be any better than he was last year. It all depends on what Will Levis can do on the field completely, because he has now got the keys to the Ferrari. He's got great weapons now. Pollard, Spears, Nuke, Ridley, Chig, really good weapons. It's all on Brian Callahan now to teach Levis and to push him into his next stage of development, which in a best case scenario, I think Calvin Ridley could still be a wide receiver too. I still think DeAndre Hopkins can be a high-end flex. Obviously, his best days are behind him, but it all has to do with Will Levis. All of it. And keep in mind, Linz, too, last year, like, he was in an offense where Derrick Henry was the centerpiece. So they didn't throw the ball very much, right? The Cincinnati Bengals last year, 63.5% of the time they threw the football. Only the Commanders had a higher percentage. So Levis is going to throw it. Levis is now going to be a sleeper in a fantasy league across the board. People are going to be picking him as a sleeper. It all depends on Levis and Callahan to make this thing work because the pieces are in place.
I think taking fantasy out of it for 2 seconds and just looking at it from Ran Carthon's point of view and the Titans, I think this is a really smart move because you're right. If Will Levis isn't good, then we'll get nothing out of this. But also the Titans will get nothing out of anything if their quarterback isn't good. So what this does by bringing Calvin Ridley in and putting him with DeAndre Hopkins and putting Tony Pollard in the backfield, this is expedites our read of whether or not Will Levis is good, right? We're going to have a much better understanding of what the answer to that question looks like at the end of the year, now that he has some weapons to throw to, and assuming that Brian Callahan doesn't like stunt his development in terms of just bad play calling or situation stuff. But I think that, I mean, they still have some help, work to do on the O-line. There are moves that need to be made, but I'm saying that this moves us in the right direction. So either way, there's value to Calvin Ridley coming to the Titans, even if it doesn't look the way that we want it to look initially, because we get our answer on Will Levis. I'm a strong believer in that being very, very important in a young quarterback's career. Give them a chance, right? That said, I like the move for Ridley in that he gets away from Jacksonville. I didn't like the way that they used him. And there's I'm not 100% sure that they would have used him the same way next year, or if they would have just tweaked some things. But he didn't have a great season for us last year in fantasy. I think related to that, Press Taylor didn't use him in an ideal way. According to Reception Perception, he lined up Calvin Ridley on the line nearly 80% of the time, and he lined up outside nearly 82% of the time. For someone who has had success moving around, that doesn't necessarily make sense. He also ran a ton of go and comeback routes on the sideline. We talked about this about mid-season. I didn't like the way that they were using him. They weren't putting him in motion. He was running a lot of really basic routes. For somebody who has the route running proficiency that Calvin Ridley has, you're not taking advantage of a skill set that you have access to. They weren't anyway in Jacksonville. So at least this inserts a bit of a question mark that we can attach to Calvin Ridley now and say, will he be used differently? Will he be used better by Brian Callahan? Does the presence of D-Hop alone help him, right? And does he help D-Hop? It's my favorite saying, your number one wide receiver is only as good as your number two wide receiver. For D-Hop, for crying out loud, last year with Treylon Burks, especially lining him up outside where I don't think that's his ideal spot. That does nothing for D-Hop. They didn't have anybody there taking defensive attention away from him, except for obviously the guy in the backfield, Derrick Henry. So I'm curious to see if Treylon Burks now moves to the slot, whether or not that's a better move for him. I have no interest in Treylon Burks in fantasy, but I do think that the addition of Ridley and D-Hop into that wide receiver room kind of changes the two of them together, changes things for all of them. And so that'll be interesting to see. Ridley, by the way, also is going to drop from where we took him in drafts last year.
No question.
I had no interest in drafting him. I thought he was going too high. There were too many unknowns there. It didn't pay off for us. He was wide receiver 16 in fantasy drafts last season with an ADP of 33 in PPR formats. So he's going to drop from there to a place where I think is a little bit more realistic and maybe value driven. I kind of think in some ways that there's more of a chance that I'll draft Calvin Ridley this year than I think I'll have more interest in drafting him where he goes this year than I did last year. Do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I was
sure
I didn't get a lot of Ridley last year, to be honest with you, because I just didn't want to draft him in the third round.
Yeah.
Not that I was anti-Ridley. I mean, he finished in the top 20, but
it's just so high.
Great. Right.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, and we're going to get to Jacksonville. I'd rather have Christian Kirk than Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins next season. Easy lemon squeezy, because you leave Ridley out of that mix and he's gone. That's 136 targets that are gone. And I know they brought in Gabe Davis, but I don't really particularly care for Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis couldn't get it done with Josh Allen, and Josh Allen is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. So I mean, it's good that Ridley's gone for Davis's value, and maybe you draft him as a low 3, high 4. I don't trust him. I think the fact that Ridley's gone is going to benefit Christian Kirk, who's now a wide receiver 2 again. Remember, he was very good 2 years ago. And Evan Engram, who was exceptional at tight end last year.
Who's the wide receiver 1? You're saying in fantasy, Christian Kirk is a wide receiver 2.
Yes.
Okay. I was like, he's not the wide receiver 2 in Jacksonville. He's the best guy there.
Yeah.
Got it.
He's going to get a lot of targets. And, obviously you got the draft and some things that could happen in terms of what the Jaguars do at wide receiver. But I mean, if they stand pat the way it is right now,
No.
And Christian Kirk's a big winner, and Evan Engram's a big winner because Ridley and the 136 targets that he saw last year are gone, and there's no way Gabe Davis is seeing 136 targets. No chance.
I mean, there's no doubt that Ridley leaving and Gabe coming in, I think Gabe maybe makes more sense for the Jaguars as long as Ridley stays. Like, now that Ridley is gone, I don't like that wide receiver room at all. And I'm assuming that there's another move that has to come, right? Because you can't go into the season with Zay Jones and Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk. Love Christian Kirk, but I think you need a stronger guy on the outside. I mean, and good grief, we talked about the way that Press Taylor used Calvin Ridley last year. Like, that's Gabe's gig, right? Like, running those go routes on the sideline. You can use him for that to stretch the field. You just need somebody else that you can move around. I'm not sure
they still have Zay Jones.
Yeah, but
they signed Dever Duvernay. So I mean, like, that's not like
what, dude? This is so much blah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Zay Jones is not garbage. He's a couple years ago, he's a good receiver. But I don't know. If
he has other people around him, he's not going to carry your offense, though.
No,
like, I don't.
That's why I'm thinking Kirk is a winner, Ingram's a winner. I don't think this affects Trevor Lawrence all that greatly because he wasn't really that good last year to begin with.
Yeah.
So, but now I think Lynn's the natural pivot from Tennessee and Jacksonville is probably to Derrick Henry, right? So, and we didn't get a chance.
Well, we talked about him on Tuesday. It happened live on our show.
I remember. This fit is so perfect, and this is one of those like big wins for fantasy. In that Gus Edwards had 13 rushing touchdowns last year in this offense. So I mean, hell, Derrick had 12 of his own. Double-digit touchdowns from Derrick Henry. I think that's a guarantee unless he gets hurt. I know he's had a lot of wear and tear. He's going into age 30 season, but he's kind of a freak. And so I think in his sleep, he could rush for 1,212 touchdowns in this offense. And I mean, him and Lamar in the same backfield is going to be fun. I think the Ravens could potentially add a wide receiver in the draft. So that could be good. I mentioned this on Sports Illustrated that few things in life are perfect, right? The 72 Dolphins were perfect. Def Leppard's Hysteria album was perfect. Some would say that Sydney Sweeney is perfect. Derrick Henry to Baltimore is perfect. I'm sorry, I had to get it in there. I have a big crush on her, by the way.
Are you trying to get something done there? Is that like a subtle thing that you're just trying to float? Like squeezed in a little Sydney Sweeney? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
by the way, on that note, did you know that Brad Pitt turned 60 years old? I saw that on Instagram. It was like happy birthday, Brad Pitt. The fact that man is 60 years old is, I can't unsee that information, and I need to. I need that information to have never entered this brain. That man is not allowed to be 60.
That dude
won
the handsome sweepstakes. I will tell you that right now. And I wish I can get on board of that some, because boy, Brad Pitt, he's got a good resume too, if you know what I mean.
What do you want on board?
God bless him, man. He's like 60 and he's dating a 30-something-year-old. Hell. Whatever. That's great for him. Anyways, I just brought us right off. Of course,
60, that makes me sad.
I do that all the time. So I will let you get us back on the tracks.
Okay. So since you brought up Derrick Henry, I'm not sure. I feel like I've had so many different conversations. I can't remember everybody that we talked about on Tuesday. Did we talk about Gus Edwards to the Chargers?
No.
The Ravens back
Super great fit. So I wonder if Jim called John and said, I got your guy, Gus Edwards, big brother. Wait, who's younger? I don't even know. Is Jim younger or John younger? Who's younger?
That's a good question, John.
Jim
I believe it's John.
Younger. Jim looks older.
I feel like I'm making.
I'll Google it. I think it's John. Talking.
Okay.
So, but no.
While you're also listening very closely,
I will, of course,
to everything I'm saying.
Wait,
hold on. Nuggets that I'm dropping. Are you Googling it now?
No. What my stupid? Oh wait. I hate this. Sometimes my iPhone doesn't work when I hit the side button because I want to say, who's older, Jim or John Harbaugh?
He's literally Googling this on the show. Okay.
John Harbaugh is the older. Yes. John Harbaugh is older. So we were right. So anyways.
No, that's not what I said. I said the opposite of that.
Well, I said Jim looks older. John is aged better. I don't know. Anyways.
Whatever.
Gus Edwards being in Los Angeles is perfect because he knows the offense, because Greg Roman was the OC in Baltimore.
Yeah.
They love that bruising type back. But Lindsay, I wonder if they've got to add somebody else, because Eckler's gone,
right?
And Spiller is still there, but Kelly's a free agent, so they got to add somebody else.
I totally agree.
But Edwards does see his value rise. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they go in the direction of a running back at some point in the draft.
And they've done lousy with running backs in the draft lately, but yeah.
Well, there's a different they there. And that's always important to note. At this time of year, I keep hearing theys, like right with the Titans, they could have paid AJ Brown and now they are paying D-Hop and Calvin Ridley the same money or, whatever. Like it's a different they. And I know that the team is the same with the Panthers. There are different general managers in place that are sometimes trying to clean up moves that were made by past general managers. Anyway, that's the case with the Chargers this year.
Linz, because everyone in the industry is going to tag Michigan players coming out of college to LA. I wonder if Harbaugh would go after Blake Corum.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a popular theory. That's a popular theory, and I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. But so Gus Edwards brings like a power back dynamic that they haven't really had for the last few years. That's not Austin Eckler's game. They also brought in Will Dissly, who's a blocking back. So they're trying to kind of beef themselves up in terms of the run game. And I think that that's a smart approach. Mike Williams cut by the Chargers in order to get cap compliant.
All right. So here we go. Keenan Allen, stud. He was a stud last year before he went down. Stud.
Yeah.
Quentin Johnston now becomes a potential sleeper unless the Chargers draft Malik Nabers or Rome Odunze, and then I will be on the
anyone else
bandwagon, and I will say that one of those two guys in the Powder Blues will be a big-time sleeper in fantasy. Yes. Because now Williams is out of here. So where do you think Williams lands? Like the first team that I think of is Kansas City because, they need a wide receiver, which, again, I was a dummy and totally wrong. I didn't think they'd get back to the Super Bowl, but they did with crap wide receivers besides Rashee Rice. I mean, Pittsburgh, cut Allen Robinson and they traded Deontay Johnson. So like maybe are they looking for a wide receiver? I don't know. Denver traded Jerry Jeudy, but they don't have. I don't know if they have any interest in Mike Williams. I'm not sure. Like any teams that you think in particular would pop, for Mike Williams. The Saints are going to cut Michael Thomas. I mean, would they bring in Williams? I don't know.
Well, the problem with Mike Williams obviously is, and I think he's such a good wide receiver, right? And he would give you a true X receiver who can absolutely get it done and all, but he's coming off of this injury and he is older and he is expensive. So it's like from a fit standpoint, it's hard to figure out who's willing to do that. And also, I don't know what his number is coming off the injury. Like, what are we trying to get? How much are we trying to maximize the bag, so to speak?
Wide receivers are expensive. Yeah. So, wide receivers are more expensive than running backs. Mike Williams has had, from a fantasy standpoint, he's had one exceptional year in his career. One. He had 1,000 yards in 2019, but only had 2 touchdowns. You remember that year? And then a few years ago, he put up bananas numbers. He had 9 touchdowns over 11. It was his breakout year. But then the year after that, he only had 895 yards and he got hurt. And then last year, he got hurt again. So I am not going to be in the Mike Williams business from a fantasy perspective unless he goes to a team with an elite quarterback and a need, because he's always hurt. Like, that's the problem with Mike Williams. Guys who are named Mike Williams and play wide receiver are cursed. I don't know why. I don't know why. Mike Williams from USC, not really. I'm not going to mention the other Mike Williams because that's a whole sad story. But this guy here, he's had one good year in the NFL, really, from a fantasy standpoint. And he's had injury issues the last couple of years.
Can I just tell you, the Mike Williams coming out of USC is the biggest swing and a miss that I've ever had as an evaluator of somebody jumping from college to the pros. I thought for sure. And by the way, this was before I started covering the NFL. And so I was looking at it through a college prism, but I covered USC and I was like, this guy, size, all of the things, if there is anyone that I have watched in college that I am sure is going to translate to the NFL, it's Mike Williams. And that didn't happen. So
there have been 8 NFL players
retired
named Mike Williams
evaluation. Wow.
In the history of the league. 8.
That's incredible.
I don't know how many of them played wide receiver. I know at least 3 did. But
Well, Daniel Jeremiah tweeted that like Mike Williams from the Chargers is one of the best guys that he's ever been around, and he's a really good teammate.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah,
Would be a great locker room addition, and so that's something to keep in mind too, not for fantasy purposes, but in terms of trying to find a landing spot that he might have some value to these teams if that's his reputation within the league that goes beyond what he's able to do on the football field. So we'll see where he goes, and then we'll be able to figure out what his fantasy value is as a result. Diontae Johnson.
Yeah, I know.
To the Carolina Panthers.
I don't love it.
No,
I don't love it. I don't know that his ceiling is any better than it was in Pittsburgh. Now,
how could it be worse? Right. Can you pick it like that up? It was bad.
You can make it. By the way, the Cardinals are trading Rondale Moore to Atlanta for Desmond Ridder. That just popped up.
Hey.
Not much fantasy impact there, but just thought I'd throw that out there. Back to Diontae Johnson. So I mean, Diontae Johnson has not really been good in fantasy since Ben Roethlisberger retired. He didn't score a touchdown 2 years ago. I think he had 5 last year. He's averaging like 11, 12 points per game, which is not great. And I get it. A lot of it had to do with Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett not developing. But Bryce Young, I mean, listen, I'm not gonna say Bryce Young's a bust. Of course, it's only 1 year. He had nobody around him.
He's not a bust. Don't even say I'm not gonna say he is. Like that's a stupid conversation to have at this stage.
Yeah, no.
You're leaning into it.
Okay. Give the kid some time. I mean, not every quarterback is CJ Stroud. In fact, most of them aren't. So it's a good move for him because Bryce
or have what CJ Stroud had around him.
Right. Right. Exactly. So you got Diontae, you got Adam Thielen, who's 34 this year, but he led the team in targets and catches and receiving yards and touchdowns, everything. So his value takes a hit. Jonathan Mingo is still there, right? I mean, like he's not a sleeper anymore for sure. But like, I mean, it's an addition, and the Panthers have to add more now. They have to have more help, offensive line. Maybe another running back because, Miles Sanders stinks, a tight end. Like they still need to add, but I don't love this for Diontae Johnson. I mean, I don't really know that Diontae Johnson, Lindsay, is more than like a low 3 at wide receiver in Carolina because Adam Thielen's going to be there and he's got the rapport with Bryce Young. So hell, Thielen may lead that team in targets again. I don't know, but I don't love the move for anybody but Bryce Young. George Pickens too for Pittsburgh.
Just breaking down the Panthers. Well, I don't know how I feel about George Pickens. George Pickens, I don't think he is a 1. I don't think he is. Right, and so that I think is part of the mental math that I'm doing here. Diontae Johnson to the Panthers, first and foremost, and you mentioned it, I think it's huge for Bryce Young. We had to do this for Bryce Young this offseason. And I think that's part of the loss of Brian Burns and in a move where they look really, really bad. And he goes to the Giants and all of this swapperoo stuff. I think that it's actually probably ripping off a Band-Aid for Carolina. That's a high premium position. So you definitely need edge rushers, but more than anything this offseason, you needed to put offensive pieces around Bryce Young. You cannot go through another season putting Bryce Young in a position that you put him last year. And they've done some good work in that department, bringing in some offensive line help with the wide receiver, Diontae Johnson. I think that this is a good move for him. He is a very, very good separator, which the Panthers didn't have any of last year. Like nobody in that wide receiver room was really strong at separating. And so that doesn't give Bryce Young a whole lot to work with. Diontae Johnson, I think, upgrades the room by a lot. And I'm not saying that he becomes this hugely attractive fantasy asset, but I think that anybody who can make the offense better, I think, you factor in prolonged drives, you factor in more touchdowns, all that kind of stuff. It kind of elevates everybody's fantasy value to a degree. And then you figure out how it's allocated amongst the pieces. I think that part of what we saw with Diontae Johnson last year in terms of, I know people were frustrated with some of the loafing and stuff, those plays. I think that had to do with Pittsburgh and frustration and maybe some inaccuracy from his quarterback. And I'm not saying that we know for sure that this is a massive upgrade for him in terms of situation, but I think at least out of the gate, you're going to get a renewed, refreshed committed to, finishing the route, finishing the play, all that kind of stuff. I think we're going to get a better version of Diontae Johnson, at least early, right? Like if it tanks, then we'll see how he handles that. But I kind of like the move for Diontae Johnson. I am worried about the effect that it has on Pittsburgh. Depending on what move they make next, I think they have a massive hole at wide receiver. I mean, George Pickens is your guy, and then what?
Yeah, after that, after
more
that,
Calvin Austin,
Dez Fitzpatrick. You're looking at like Calvin Austin, as you just mentioned. Marquez Callaway, like Denzel Mims. They got a bunch of, I don't want to say bums, but like just, curtain jerkers behind them. But here's the thing with the Steelers. This, Lindsay, they have done very well historically drafting wide receivers. Antonio Brown was not, this highly touted, guy who was going to be awesome. Diontae Johnson also. George Pickens, who fell in the draft because he had, the off-field kind of attitude sort of issues. But like they've done pretty well at wide receiver in the draft, and they're going to have to do that again. And maybe they go wide receiver. I believe they have the 20th overall pick coming up in the draft. Maybe they go wide receiver, but at some point they'll have to take one. But here's the thing. Arthur Smith ran the second most 13 personnel in the entire league last year. Right? The guy runs 13 like crazy. And for you guys who don't know what 13 is, it's not only Dan Marino's number, it's also one running back and 3 tight ends on the field. So Pat Freiermuth, yay, good job. And Pittsburgh, I'm sure, is going to add, some tight ends. They have Darnell Washington, who they drafted last year. They have Connor Haywood. So there's some guy, but they run a lot of 13.
Babs. Yeah. Babs. Arthur Smith was at Brock Bowers' pro day yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Would that be
not last until 20 unless they trade up?
Would that be the funniest thing you've ever seen? If Arthur Smith somehow goes and gets, they're like, wait, we have a new unicorn at tight end. Is he the best one to come out? What? Better than Sam Laporta? I want him, so I cannot use him.
Oh God. So anyways, and by the way, the funny thing with Kyle Pitts, with the whole jersey thing, like, I'll give you 8, just give me targets. I love that. That's perfect for me and for all of us fantasy nuts out there. But back to the Steelers.
Yeah.
This is not good for Russell Wilson, even though he never threw a pass to Diontae Johnson in his career. It's just one less guy that he has as a weapon. To me, depending on what the Steelers do in the draft, or, maybe, we still have free agents that are available out there. If they go and get a Mike Williams, I don't really think they will. But this is like running a team that's going to run the football. They've got 2 good backs, and they're going to, last year, Bijan was, he was still a top 10 fantasy running back, not what we kind of had hoped that he would be. But this is an offense that, I don't love Russell as much without Diontae Johnson, because I need another weapon there at wide receiver. Here's a question for you. George Pickens, now the number 1. You don't believe in him, but is he a wide receiver 2, or is he more of a flex for you now? That right now, as it stands, he is the guy. Like, he's that like little video with Will Smith, like looking around Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Who else is there?
So he is, let's see. He finished as wide receiver. Is that real?
No, he wasn't very good last year. He sucked last year. He had a bit of a resurgence, like, for a couple of games, but he wasn't very good last year.
Okay. Where is he? Hold on.
Lindsay can't even find him because he was wide receiver 30 last year. Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Wide receiver 30. 12 points per game.
Had 87 targets. So
no, 100% for sure. I'm just looking at what I actually wanted to look at, and I'm not going to waste your time by pulling up the ADP. Is what his ADP was last year.
Okay.
Because he kind of feels like somebody who's going to go in the same range, but I think he did last year, as like where Drake London was going last year. To a degree, do you think that feels a little bit right? Like,
I obviously like Drake London a lot more because I believe in Kirk Cousins a little bit more than maybe
No. I'm not talking about Drake London this year. Off the table.
You're talking about last year.
Reframe this conversation and think of what you're looking at when Drake London was a wide receiver 1, clearly going to get the most targets in Atlanta's offense last year, with quarterback play that we didn't necessarily trust, and a team that we thought was going to run the ball a lot. that feels a little bit like how I'm looking at Pittsburgh right now. And so if George Pickens, and I don't think George Pickens is as good a wide receiver as Drake London. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is here, I don't think I'll be drafting George Pickens. I just don't think I will, because my guess is that he'll probably move up draft charts because people will be, unless, and I think my real read of this situation, this is a TBD, that there's more work to be done. But if it remains like this, and George Pickens is their wide receiver 1 going into the year, and they just add like another piece somewhere else, like there are Tyler Boyd rumors out there. But if they add another piece like that doesn't usurp him in the wide receiver 1 category, then my guess is that people will draft him high enough because he's a wide receiver 1 and they think that the targets will be there. And I think I would rather go if he goes in that range where Drake London went last year, I'm probably just going to go elsewhere and have no George Pickens. That's my guess.
I'm getting very angry right now because NFFC does not have archived ADP. And then when I went to Fantasy Football Calculator, the damn thing's not loading for 2023. Come on, calculator, do better than that.
I can find this.
Yeah, so you find it. Anyways, I could go on maybe Fantasy Dynasty.
I got it. I got it. Fantasy data. Fantasy data. I'll have it in 2 seconds here.
Yeah, fantasy data. Win.
So Drake London was wide receiver 25, went 62 last year. That was his ADP. Hold, please. That standard timeout, must reframe.
Yes. He's 24. 24 in PPR.
Okay.
At wide receiver.
Wide receiver 24. How'd you get there faster than me? That's frustrating.
I've got lightning fast internet here in South Florida, Rhodes.
Okay, so Drake London, wide receiver 24, overall 57. And George Pickens last year was wide receiver 34, overall 79. So I think that's about right. I think he probably jumps up, again, barring a different wide receiver 1 coming into Pittsburgh. Then I think he probably jumps up to the range that Drake London was looking at, which is roughly, just looking at the group of people that were there. Now we're in like the lower end wide receiver 1s, people we had questions about. Right? Like Terry McLaurin, Christian Watson, Mike Williams from the Chargers, Chris Godwin was in there as a strong wide receiver 2. So in that range, I think that's probably where we're going to look at George Pickens going. And I don't think I want any part of that. So I would strategically plan my draft on maybe taking a running back in that range.
Rank these 3 wide receivers who were affected by free agency.
Okay.
Calvin Ridley, George Pickens, and Drake London.
Pickens.
What's your order? I know what mine is.
London's obviously one.
I would agree.
London is obviously one. Oh God, this one's tough. Okay.
So it's between Pickens and Ridley.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I won't have either of them, is my guess. As they stand right now, I wouldn't prioritize drafting either of them, but I think I would take Ridley over Pickens.
Okay. All right.
But that feels very toss-up-y because I have different concerns about both of them. Like I'm not 100% convinced that Russell just steps in and is automatically the starter in Pittsburgh.
Really?
I just don't.
Well, I mean,
I don't know that he's like Kenny Pickett hasn't been that good. He hasn't been good. Let me reframe that. He has not been good.
Right.
But we also had concerns about the offensive coordinator that was there, right, for a very, very long time. I don't know. I don't know if they look like a team that's prioritizing running the ball. The moves that they've made. I mean, I kind of feel like my interest in that offense from a fantasy standpoint is Najee and Jalen. Because I think that they feel like a team that's telegraphing that they're going to run. And then also for those running backs, Russell Wilson in the last 2 years has checked down a league most 18% of the time. So if he's checking down to his running backs, then that's interesting for both of them. And if they're prioritizing running the ball, then that's interesting for them. I think those are the 2 assets that I'm the most interested in on the Steelers after all of the free agency moves. I don't think that Russell Wilson, as much as we talked about how he was better last year, I think that there are some issues with his game that are problematic at this point. And I've said this a million times. I don't know why. I don't know why this happened. I don't know what's different. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I think a lot of the problem with Russell Wilson's him. And so I'm not 100% sure that like he's going to go in there and they're going to be like, yes, this is what we've been waiting for,
you know? From a fantasy standpoint, I think, our expectations are curbed, right? Because he was okay, QB 14 last year. That's all fine and dandy, but we don't expect Russell from Seattle anymore. We expect a guy who's going to be a QB 2, who you'll be able to use when the matchup is right and likely will not be able to use unless the matchup is favorable. And also another thing to keep in mind, AFC North defenses are nasty good. He's got to play Baltimore twice a year. He's got to play Cleveland twice a year. Cincinnati's, they're not bad either on the defensive side. You got to play them twice a year. So the schedule is not going to be the best for Russell in division either. Right. That's why I'm thinking, in the article that I wrote over at Sports Illustrated, I just said he's a push because he was a QB2 last year, and I think he'll be a QB2 next season.
Yeah, I won't have any of him. Let's talk about the just real quickly. Well, before we move on to this, how about from a wide receiver standpoint, there are a handful that are still out there. Tyreek is talking up Mike Thomas to Miami. Any interest in that move?
Michael Thomas has been broken down for years now. Mm-hmm. It's fool's gold. If you like the name, okay, great. That's all he's got right now is name value. Has the guy played a full season in the last 4 years? In Miami, he'd still be like the third or fourth option in the offense in the passing game, at best. So yeah, now I'm passing on Michael Thomas there. If that were his destination, I'm probably passing on Michael Thomas everywhere. I don't care where he goes.
Yeah, unless it's last couple rounds or something like that, which probably isn't. Yeah.
But so what? At this point, Lance, I'd rather take it like a young wide receiver and be like, I'll take a shot on this guy. Who the hell knows, right? So like a Tank Dell.
Well, at least with Michael Thomas, if he were to look, this is a scenario in life that isn't going to play out, right? Like he's not going to be a guy that goes in the last couple of rounds. But I think that there is some value to if you've already taken some younger players to maybe go do a Michael Thomas, because you could put him on your bench if he's in. Then he's fine to play. Usually,
it's a lot.
The problem is that he's not in. He's not healthy more often than he's not.
Yeah. So I don't want to compare him to Adam Thielen last year because Adam Thielen went in as the one for the Panthers, and Thomas ain't going in as a one for nobody.
No,
for nobody. So I don't know. I'm probably off the Michael Thomas train. I have been for a few years. Right. Your best ability is availability, Rhodes.
Gabe Davis is talking right now in Jacksonville at a podium. And he said when noon hit last Monday and the phone rang, thank God they called. And I want to scan Twitter to see if people followed up to see who called. Who did you talk to? Because it was Monday. It was the negotiating period, and that is tampering. What do you think about these tampering charges that are getting thrown around now for Saquon and Kirk Cousins, that the individual players actually talked to the teams, which no, duh. You just can't actually acknowledge it, right? Exactly. Who in their right mind would agree to a contract that's that big for Saquon or Kirk Cousins? These are massive life decisions. Of course, they're themselves talking to these people. Anybody who believes that they're not, and not just them, but anybody else that's making these kinds of deals, of course, they're hearing from the general manager or coach themselves. Anyway, technically, that is tampering because you're not allowed to have those conversations with the actual player until the new league year starts. You're supposed to talk to the player's agent. And James Franklin, the Penn State coach, made a comment earlier this week that said that Saquon had a conversation with Howie Roseman. So now that's where all of these tampering charges are coming from, which whatever,
exactly.
Whatever. Okay, Fabs, the last thing I want to ask you about, and we'll get to, free agency winners and losers on next week's show once all of the dust has settled. backup quarterbacks. There are some backups that are going places, and I think that they kind of they're interesting, not from a fantasy standpoint, but just in terms of like what the next move might be, because some of these teams actually need quarterbacks, like the Raiders. Minshew going to the Raiders and getting the deal that he is getting. So he's in a backfield with Aiden O'Connell. To me, what I think that telegraphs is that they're not going to move up in the draft to go get that guy, because they went for like the high end backup. Like, this is a bridge guy, right? So to me, I see them I believe they're at 13. Correct me if I'm wrong. I see them ideally trading back in the first round, picking up a little bit more draft capital, and then getting like a Penix or something like that later in the first round, if they can play their cards right and time that properly. Tom Telesco, I know, has never traded back in his entire career. I know, I've heard that, Raiders fans. I'm well aware. There's a first for everything. And I think that this is probably telegraphing that type of move at quarterback, which would be interesting. Minshew, if he was the starter for a season, is what does that do to the assets that are there?
I mean, so Michael Pittman was awesome. So I wouldn't necessarily like put a dagger into the heart of Davante Adams or Jacoby Myers.
Yeah.
Pittman was great. And, Josh Downs had a little bit of a hot streak there too as well for the Colts. So I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think Minshew's better than Garoppolo for Davante Adams. Minshew at least knows where to go with the damn football. But is Davante Adams
still go downfield?
Is still.
I wonder what Minshew's ADOT was last year.
Well, you could look that up while I'm chatting if you want to do that. I know your internet's a little bit slower than mine, but I can check that out. But I mean, I don't think Adams' value really changes that much because his quarterbacks weren't really great last year. So I think he's still like a bottom wide receiver 1 type, but he's a declining asset. There's no question about that, because I would think Minshew is going to be the favorite to start based on the dough, that they gave him. It's not like they gave him the Pirates booty, but they gave him enough money where he's going to be the starter. So I would think Minshew would be the favorite over O'Connell there, unless the Raiders made a move. Justin Fields is still out there. That's the one thing that blows my mind. Everything I hear now is that he's going to be a backup somewhere. How the F is Justin Fields not better than like 10 of the quarterbacks who are going to start? Like, there's 32 starting jobs in the NFL, and Justin Fields is not good enough to get one of them? I get it. He's not a great passer or whatever. Flipping Tim Tebow was a starter and got a team to the damn playoffs, and he sucked as a passer. So, like, I don't know. Whatever. Rex Grossman got into a Super Bowl, right? So, so did Trent Dilfer. But whatever. It is what it is. I don't get it. I'm not going to get mad about that, because I think Fields should be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't know what it is. He's got some kind of stink on him, whether it's the gyms are watching the tape or whatever the case may be. They don't want him. They don't want him. They don't want him.
Stink that they're watching the tape. That's the funniest line ever.
He's
got some stink, like they've seen him played football or something. I don't know.
Maybe that's the stink. I don't know. But the guy is a mobile type quarterback who can extend plays. And is he a great passer? No, he's not a great passer. But there's been a lot of quarterbacks who've had success in the league who maybe not be the greatest passers in the world, right? Because they have other assets to their game. So I don't get it. I have no idea. Whatever, it is what it is. If he ends up going to be in a backup for the Eagles or something like that, I'm going to throw up. I might literally throw up. I'll put it on TikTok. All right. But I don't get how
TikTok your vomit.
I'm sure that won't be allowed on TikTok, even though I think TikTok's getting banned in the US anyways. So I probably won't have TikTok anymore. And my 54,000 followers. What to do? But anyways, I think I have 50, 60, something like that. I have no idea. The kids follow Fabs. I don't know.
Oh my God, what is happening right now? This is off the rails.
I've been using the lingo. I've been saying, hey,
that's not it.
Justin Fields is not Gucci.
That is not it.
I just don't understand if Justin
Fields, I bet you everyone under the age of 30 automatically unfollows you every time you say that. They're like, no, God, can't cringe.
No, he's trying to be cool. I got to talk to Matthew, my stepson, and get more cool terms from him.
Okay. By the way, you joked about how slow my computer was. It was almost comedic. I was scrolling down and it would take a second and then jump to the next. It was so slow.
All right.
Gardner Minshew's ADOT.
Find it.
Last season, 7.6. That is very low. That ranked 50th in the NFL.
That's not 50th. Good.
So that makes me a little bit scared about Davante Adams if we're just bringing him closer to anyway. Jakobi Meyers, maybe. Anyway, we'll see what that means. Again, TBD, new quarterback will add to the mix. Jacoby Brissett, $8 million to be the Patriots, backup or bridge, depending on what they do. They've got the number 3 overall pick. We assume that will probably be a quarterback. Marcus Mariota, $6 million to be the Commanders' backup, which I'm curious to see if that means that Sam Howell is moving, because we assume that they will insert a quarterback into that room.
I think that would be, maybe a team will go after Sam Howell. I mean, are the Vikings like, whoa, we're in the Sam Darnold like business and that's it? I don't know. I'm sorry. I know you love Sam Darnold.
No, I don't think. I mean, yes, I do. That's a separate conversation.
Competition. I don't get that, but okay.
He will. I think they're. I think they're gonna try and draft a quarterback. Yeah. No, I think the Vikings are totally going to draft a quarterback. I don't think that they're going into the season with like Sam Darnold and scene. We're all set. I don't think that that's the strategy at all. Whether or not he's a bridge and they let a rookie sit on the bench for a year, or, come in if needed, or if he is a backup, I'm not sure. Joe Flacco is a backup again in the NFL.
I hate that.
To a quarterback with a very similar skill set.
I know. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to change the offense at all if Richardson gets hurt again.
Oh my God.
That was a weird one. I think Flacco was freaking good at the end of last year. I love the story. He was the comeback player of the year. And now he goes, I mean, you got a job at least. He's going to play. But that's a weird thing. It's like Joe Flacco could not be more different than Anthony Richardson. But okay, whatever. It is what it is, I guess.
Jameis, I think, is it arguably the backup. Well, Joe Flacco too, because Anthony Richardson and his health history last season. You might want to keep an eye on Joe Flacco as a guy that you might have to insert as a backup. Jameis, I think, is another guy because he enters that Browns backfield. Chances of us seeing him next year are, I think, higher than most teams playing behind Deshaun Watson. The last player that we have not discussed today that I can't remember if it happened on Tuesday. My brain is mush with all of these free agency moves in terms of the timeline and what I've discussed and where I've discussed it. But Joe Mixon certainly is a big move to the Texans. So if we didn't talk about that on Tuesday, or even if we did, we've now had, some time to kind of let that move sink in. How do we like that move for Joe Mixon in fantasy?
I dig it. I love it. He goes to a good young offense with a good offensive line, an ascending quarterback. I think it's perfect. I don't think now he was the RB6 last year. I don't think it's going to be the RB6, but is it within the realm of possibility to Mixon to be a low RB1 in that offense? Yeah, it really is. And he will be a guy that a lot of folks who want to go with wide receivers early in the draft and then take a Joe Mixon in round 3 or 4 or wherever. I haven't done a mock draft yet, and I haven't redone my rankings yet. That'll be next week.
Let's do it.
I'm not sure.
Let's also do a mock draft next week.
Yeah, we can do that.
Can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that. So
can I put you in charge of finding some people?
Well, I'll get Roday. Roday will do it in a second. If he's available, we'll get him. We'll get his handsome face on there. I can't get Brad Pitt though. I know some people, but I don't know people that I don't know people like that. Sorry. I'm sorry. But yeah, maybe we'll try to get some folks to do a little bit of a mock. That'll be fun. But just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Mixon round 3 or 4. Somewhere around there. So maybe around the turn at round 4, potentially, if he's there, you go 3 wide receivers, Mixon your 1. I think it's good. I love it. And then we talked about Zach Moss. Great spot for him. I think he shares some of the workload with Chase Brown. But in Houston, unless you think Dameon Pierce is going to reemerge as a viable fantasy option, no. Joe Mixon's got that backfield to himself. Yeah. So it's a great spot for him. It's really good. I really enjoy where Mixon ended up. That was a perfect spot for him.
Yeah, especially since, he looks like he's probably at that age where we're looking at a depreciating asset. So put him in a situation where he is going to have the best chance to succeed with CJ Stroud and that passing game being what it is. He should have some space.
Rhodes, he averaged 15 points a game last year as I quickly scramble to look. 15.7. And that was RB6. That was good enough for RB6 on a total points, not points per game, but total points.
Right.
You tell me he can't average 14 to 15 points per game in Houston?
He can.
And with his eyes closed. No question about Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. Michael Fabiano, you can follow him on the socials at Michael_Fabiano. I am Lindsay_Rhodes on Insta. I'm Lindsay Rhodes NFL. This is the Believe Fantasy Football Show presented by Bet Online. Thanks so much for joining us. Please, if you have time, if you enjoyed what you just listened to or watched, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, do all the things. It'll help us in terms of our growth. And we hope that you'll join us again next Tuesday when we are back for more with the winners and losers of the free agency period, and also that mock draft that Fabs is gonna
I'm gonna set it up. I'm gonna get on. I'm gonna text Roday right now, and
then.
we'll get her done. We'll get
It's
her done.
So good. He's gonna take all of the Titans players in round
he is.
1, 2, 3. Awesome. We'll see how he likes those moves based on how he drafts. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again on Tuesday.